almost 75% of Jewish college students have experienced anti-Semitism since the start of the Israel-Hamas conflict.
Talking about genocide of Jews, and they can't just say, yeah, that's wrong, that's harassment. I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjakovich. And we are unapologetically outspoken. Hey, everyone. Happy Monday, right? It's Monday. Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So over the past couple months, Stephanie, we've done a few episodes on the crazy shit that's been happening with the rise of anti-Semitism in America, all starting as a result of this Hamas-Israel conflict. And we've both been completely appalled at the level of anti-Semitism that's being expressed in America, not only with these pro-Palestinian protests taking place throughout the country, but especially what's been happening on college campuses, where student protests have basically risen to the level of outright clear hatred towards Jewish students. And it's to the point where pro-Palestinian students have threatened Jewish students with calls for violence and genocide. And we haven't done an update on this in a couple of weeks, but if you have no idea what's going on in the world, you can go back and listen to some of our episodes from a few weeks ago. But the level of anti-Semitism at this point has become so transparent that the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights is currently investigating 4 Ivy League schools, Harvard, the University of Pennsylvania, Columbia, and Cornell, for complaints of alleged anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And so this past Tuesday, last week, 3 college presidents had to testify before Congress in a 5-hour hearing about how they're handling anti-Semitic incidents on their campuses. And this is the first time that college executives have been summoned before Congress to basically defend their actions in the wake of the October 7th attack on Israel. And these 3 administrators are representatives of Harvard, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania. And even though these are all private schools, I was reading an article in CBS Detroit that said because they receive millions of dollars in federal funding, these schools are all subject to federal anti-discrimination laws. And so Republican lawmakers are saying that these universities just aren't doing enough to protect their students. So these 3 college presidents, all of whom are female, by the way, were called to testify before the House Committee on Education and the Workforce to try and defend their actions in not having punished or expelled students who have been using outright violent and hateful language towards Jews. And all 3 of these all 3 of these administrators basically gave the same explanation, that they're trying to navigate the line between hate speech and freedom of expression. I don't even have the clip that I was going to play.
Oh, well, you know what? I do remember part of the hearing where they were talking about this, because it's laughable when they say freedom of expression, because one of the Republican lawmakers pointed out, are you aware that Harvard was voted dead last for free speech on campus, because they were the ones that were shutting down and censoring basically anyone on the right in the previous years that were trying to talk. And so here, they're trying to say, oh, it's freedom of expression. Okay, well, when it was people on the right, you were shutting it down. So it's just a double standard yet again. No surprise there.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I totally came in unprepared with the clip, but we've talked in previous episodes about how anti-Semitic activity on campuses has increased dramatically. And I think in a previous episode, we referenced a recent survey by the Anti-Defamation League and Hillen International. And that survey found that almost 75% of Jewish college students have experienced anti-Semitism since the start of the Israel-Hamas conflict. And BBC News reported that before this congressional hearing started, several Jewish students appeared at a press conference hosted by House Republicans, and they shared their experiences. And one of the students, his name was Eyal Yacobi, and he attends U-Penn, and he described how Jewish students there have received threatening and anti-Semitic emails. And he also talked about an incident where a swastika was spray painted in an academic building. And he said to reporters, like, why doesn't the university hold the perpetrators of these acts accountable? And that's exactly the question and why this entire hearing took place. So during the hearing, Republican Rep. Kevin Kiley from California, he asked Harvard's president, her name's Claudine Gray. He said, if you were talking to a prospective student's family, a Jewish student's family right now, could you look them in the eye and tell them that their son or daughter would be safe and feel safe and welcome on your campus? And Gay replied, quote, we are absolutely committed to student safety, end quote. So, Stephanie, would you feel comfortable with that answer if you were Jewish and it was your daughter being considered for admission into Harvard with everything that's been happening on the campus during the past couple months?
No, I'm not even Jewish, and I still don't want my daughter going to any of these woke schools. And I'm sorry, how is that an answer? We are absolutely committed to student safety. That's basically a nice way of saying, no, I mean, we would like it to be safe, but, we're committed. Like, that is such a non-answer. It's absolutely absurd. And these schools have just become places that are filled with hate. And we've seen it over the past few years, like speakers getting attacked all the time at these schools if they say anything that goes against, this woke agenda. And I just feel like they've completely tarnished their reputation at this point. And it's no surprise when you look at these presidents. I mean, they're like the typical woke women you would expect to be running these institutions and putting in these ridiculous policies. But I'm going to play a clip from this ridiculous exchange between the New York rep, Elise Stefanik, and the three university presidents, because I want you to hear how absurd this is. And I also want you to imagine during this clip that I'm going to play, Liz McGill had a smirk, like this evil, smug smile on her face the whole time she was responding. So just keep that in mind as well.
At MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals, not making public statements.
Yes or no? Calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment?
I have not heard calling for the genocide for Jews on our campus.
But you've heard chants for intifada.
I've heard chants, which can be anti-Semitic depending on the context, when calling for the elimination of the Jewish people.
So those would not be according to the MIT's code of conduct or rules?
That would be investigated as harassment if pervasive and severe.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill. So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If it if the
yes
speech
or no?
If the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? The speech is not harassment. This is unacceptable, Ms. McGill. I'm going to give you one more opportunity for the world to see your answer. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
The answer is yes. And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, at an individual.
It's targeted at Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them? Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism? I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric.
And is it anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
How freaking crazy is that? We're talking about genocide of Jews, and they can't just say, yeah, that's wrong. That's harassment.
Because they went to the same fucking school as KJP. Like,
Yeah.
There's no answer. Like, you cannot give a straight answer to a question. It's absolutely insane to me. And so as a result of this hearing, the House committee, which is a bipartisan committee, by the way, they basically demanded that the governing boards of these three schools, Harvard, MIT, and U-Penn, that they dismiss all three of these university presidents, because clearly their responses to the questions were, as they referred to it, as abhorrent and should have been an easy and resounding yes, which, as we just stated, it absolutely should have been. And so I was reading in the Epic Times that the House committee wrote a letter to the governing boards of the campuses, and they stated, quote, "There is no context in which calls for the genocide of Jews are acceptable rhetoric. Their failure to unequivocally condemn calls for the systematic murder of Jews is deeply alarming. It stands in stark contrast to the principles we expect leaders of top academic institutions to uphold. It's hard to imagine any Jewish or Israeli student, faculty, or staff feeling safe when presidents of your member institutions could not say that calls for the genocide of Jews would have clear consequences on your campus. Given this moment of crisis, we demand that your boards immediately remove each of these presidents from their positions, and that you provide an actionable plan to ensure that Jewish and Israeli students, teachers, and faculty are safe on your campuses. Anything less than these steps will be seen as your endorsement of what Presidents Gay, McGill, and Kornbluth said to Congress, and an act of complicity in their anti-Semitic posture," end quote. So this was last Tuesday that this hearing took place. And so after that, 6 Pennsylvania GOP congressmen sent a letter to the University of Pennsylvania Board of Trustees chair, and they were calling for the university to fire McGill. There were student protests outside of her office demanding that she step down. There were trucks driving around the campus last Friday with billboards that said "Fire President McGill," and they were playing clips of her testimony over a loudspeaker. And then there was also an online petition that by Saturday morning, there were over 25,000 signatures demanding her resignation.
I'm glad that people are speaking up, because that's what I was wondering. It's like you see all of these pro-Hamas, protest groups. It's like, where are all of the people that are against this? And I'm glad to see that they were like calling for her resignation. And finally, according to an article from Business Insider, McGill did end up resigning. But again, like, it was after a bunch of these mega donors for the school demanded her resignation. Of course, it all boils down to money, right?
Yeah, she resigned, I think it was on Saturday. There was a prominent Wharton School donor named Ross Stevens. He's the CEO of a company called Stone Ridge Asset Management, and he threatened to withdraw a $100 million donation if the school didn't change their leadership and their values. And the push for her resignation also came from the Wharton Board of Advisors. And I guess that board is made up of like some of the most powerful business leaders on Wall Street. And then the undergraduate executive board also pushed for her resignation. So let's be real. Was this a voluntary resignation? No, it was about money. And according to the chairman of the board of trustees, she's going to remain a tenured faculty member at the school.
That's ridiculous. Oh
Yeah.
my God. Ugh.
Yeah. And basically all three of these administrators sat in this hearing completely unable to answer a basic question, like a basic human rights question. And then after their tactic backfired with their non-answers, there was so much outrage about their responses that they all started backpedaling to make apologies for their responses during the hearing. So President Gay from Harvard, she issued an apology in the Harvard Crimson student newspaper. She basically admitted she failed to properly condemn the threats of violence against Jewish students. And she stated, quote, "What I should have had the presence of mind to do in that moment was return to my guiding truth, which is that calls for violence against our Jewish community, threats to our Jewish students have no place at Harvard and will never go unchallenged," end quote. She also released a press statement to the media stating, quote, "Let me be clear." Again, sounds like fucking KJP, doesn't it?
Yep.
Anyway, let me be clear. Calls for violence or genocide against the Jewish community or any religious or ethnic group are vile. They have no place at Harvard, and those who threaten our Jewish students will be held accountable, end quote. So before McGill, quote, resigned, she followed suit and she posted a video on U-Penn to clarify her answers at the hearing, which I don't know how you can even do that. But she said, quote, "In the moment, I was focused on our university's long-standing policies aligned with the U.S. Constitution, which says that speech alone is not punishable. I was not focused on, but I should have been, the irrefutable fact that a call for genocide of Jewish people is a call for some of the most terrible violence human beings can perpetrate. It's evil, plain and simple," end quote. Like, I don't know about you, Stephanie, but I call bullshit. Like, these are too little too late statements. I give them like a score of 0 for sincerity, and they only issued these statements because they were concerned about being fired.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why everyone should go watch the video, because they sat there with these like evil, smug smiles, like the whole time they were answering, like they just thought they were so righteous or something. And I mean, they outright refused to condemn anti-Semitism. And I'm sure that they thought that they would just be applauded by everyone on the left. But instead, their donors turned on them, as did the tens of thousands of people who signed those petitions to have them fired. And after that whole fake apology, Elise Stefanik replied on X stating, quote, "No, Dr. Gay, you were given an opportunity to speak your truth, and you did. Not once, not twice, not 5 times, not 10 times. In total, Gay was asked 17 times in the hearing whether calls for genocide against Jews violate the university's code of conduct. You spoke your truth under oath 17 times, and the world heard it." I'm sorry, that was like epic, an epic response.
Yeah. And what I find totally disturbing is like, again, all of these college administrators were clearly evading the actual question. They were tiptoeing around it during the hearing, refusing to say, yes, it's fucking anti-Semitism and it's a violation of college rules. Because let's be honest here, like if this was happening and it wasn't Jewish people, let's say it was African Americans or people of color that were being like the outright targets of violence and hatred, to especially to the extreme level that has been taking place at these schools, this would be an entirely different story, don't you think?
Yeah, it'd be totally different. Like all they see is race and skin color. Okay, so like it doesn't matter to them that Hamas is committing horrendous crimes against humanity, because in the eyes of the woke, like they have the darker skin tone. They're the ones that are more oppressed, right? Again, like that ladder of oppression. Forget all the times, like we've about on this podcast, where Israel has tried to make peace deals, or the fact that Hamas like wants their own people to die. They still view them as the ones who are the oppressed ones. And I really wish that like every single one of these people that are standing for Hamas and doing all of these ridiculous things at these Ivy League schools would be forced to watch that documentary. I know I've talked about it before. It's called 47 Minutes, and it's compiled video from the GoPro cameras that Hamas wore on October 7th. And I mean, I don't even want to say what's on there because it's so horrendous. And I guess that the UN, they were actually shown this movie, and many of them threw up during the movie or walked out because it was so heinous that they couldn't stand to watch the full 47 minutes. But yet these woke Ivy League, presidents sit behind their fancy desk at the most expensive universities in the world and try to earn points on the scale of oppression. And it's like, it would be laughable if it wasn't so damn disgusting.
Yeah, I know. It's absolutely like horrifying. But here's something that I thought was at least cool. Like similar to what happened at U-Penn just before McGill resigned. Yesterday, there were billboard trucks driving around Harvard demanding that President Gay be fired. And I was reading in Fox News that the private funder who's running these billboard box truck campaigns is also going to deploy a plane over the Harvard campus with a banner reading "Stop Jew Hatred." And Stefanik, she recently posted on X, quote, "1 down, 2 to go," end quote, after McGill stepped down. But I'm curious to see what happens with President Gay, because not only is she female, but she's the first Black female to become president at Harvard. She's a political scientist. She has a background in politics and race. And she was only inaugurated as the president of Harvard like back in July, just a few months ago. And I read an article on Business Insider earlier today that like more than 500 Harvard faculty members are calling for the university to keep her on board as president. So I feel like Harvard is going to tread lightly with her and that the board is like keeping quiet. And so far, they haven't said anything. And I don't know if you've seen any updates on Sally Kornbluth from MIT, but the only thing that I've read is that the MIT governing board released a statement last Friday supporting her and saying like she's done all this excellent work in leading the community and addressing anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and hatred. And so she has the board's, quote, "full and unreserved support," end quote. And that's all I've seen about it.
Yeah, I haven't seen much on her either. And I will say, like, she was a little more professional in the hearings than the other two that were just like smirking the whole time. But I think time will tell. Like, I think that they are going to see some drastic changes in these schools of who's applying and who's donating money and everything else. Because I can't imagine that most people with common sense are going to want to send their kids there or donate anything. So it'll be really interesting to see like what happens as we move forward with this.
Well, I think this whole thing has like revealed a much deeper seated issue that's going on with our education system. Like even when Harvard first started receiving backlash about the rise in anti-Semitism on campus, Gay did take action reportedly to combat violence and hatred towards Jews because she formed an anti-Semitism committee in late October, and she held a press conference and said that the committee was going to be dedicated to, quote, "the vital work of eradicating anti-Semitism from our community," end quote. But then after her testimony this past Thursday, like clearly her testimony was very contradictory to this statement. And there's a rabbi that was on the committee named David Wolpe. And I guess he's a visiting scholar at Harvard's Divinity School. And he resigned from the committee on Thursday, claiming that Harvard's hatred against Jews is too deeply rooted for the committee to tackle. And there was an article in the Epoch Times that was talking about his resignation letter. And in that letter, he wrote, quote, "the system at Harvard, along with the ideology that grips far too many of the students and faculty, the ideology that works only along axis of oppression and places Jews as oppressors and therefore intrinsically evil, is evil itself. Battling that combination of ideologies is the work of more than a committee or a single university. It is not going to be changed by hiring or firing a single person or posting on X or yelling at people who don't post as you when you wish, as though posting is the summation of one's moral character. This is the task of educating a generation and also a vast unlearning," end quote. And like, I completely agree with this. More than one generation of students has been completely brainwashed by the school system. It starts in grade school. It continues all the way through college. And it is going to take some major changes and like fucking many years to change the culture that has basically destroyed the education system in America.
And for these schools to get their reputation back. And I'm sorry for a rabbi to say basically there's no hope for this school That's pretty
Yeah.
bad, you know?
Yep.
And just like you said, it's not just the universities that are a breeding ground for anti-Semitism. Like, this is actually happening at schools around the world that are funded by, guess who? The United Nations. And they're teaching them and advocating for anti-Semitism. So UNRWA, UNRWA, or the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, provides relief for Palestinian refugees. So they have 180 schools in like the Gaza region with about 300,000 students. They employ staff who have ties to Hamas and are dissenting anti-Semitic content to children. And okay, like, sure, but what's crazy about this is Western nations like the US are the ones that are funding it. And so I was listening to an episode on the Morning Wire who covered this, and they said that 100 Hamas terrorists have been confirmed as UNRWA graduates. And one of the Israeli released hostages said that his captor was an UNRWA teacher who provided very little food and medical attention for any of the hostages in his custody. And then other UNRWA teachers have been openly posting on social media praising the attacks on October 7th. And so this agency, I guess, has been under scrutiny for a while because many believe that it's just a Hamas front. And even Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that they disseminate anti-Semitic information. Yet we're still funding them. The United States is still funding them. And guess what? We were their biggest donor over the past year. And here's another little fun fact. When Trump was in office, he stopped the funding to UNRWA, saying that we shouldn't give more funding until a peace deal was made. But then Biden came in and guess what? Immediately turned the funding back on. Like, I'm disgusted, but I'm not surprised whatsoever at this.
Yeah, I'm not
Unbelievable.
surprised either. But this is the stuff I think people don't have any idea that this shit is going on. And that
Right.
our government is outright supporting it and funding it.
Yeah. And think about it. Like, the kids that go to these schools, how many of them have come over here and then gone to a university like Harvard or Penn State? I mean, it's just,
And how many of them have illegally crossed our border in the last 2
Yeah.
years?
yeah, exactly. So it's absolutely disgusting. And just like that rabbi said, I think it's way deeper than we even realize, which means it's going to be really hard to overcome this. But I'm glad that people are speaking up. And I'm glad that people in our government are like putting these people under oath so we can get the truth of what they really believe. And it's horrifying. So yeah, that was a crazy hearing, and we'll see what comes of it. Hopefully the other two presidents will resign. I think they should be fired, but we'll keep everyone updated on that, and we'll see you back here on Wednesday. Thanks for tuning in. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.